Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrere. This is a podcast about art, poetry, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14. My today's featured guest is Marivi Soliven. She has a debut novel entitled The Mango Bride, published by Penguin Press 2013. She won the 2011 Carlos Palanca Memorial Award, the Philippine counterpart of the Pulitzer Prize. The novel has been translated into Spanish and Filipino, and a film adaptation is in process with a projected release date of next year. Stories and essays from 16 earlier books have appeared in anthologies in Manila and the United States. When not writing or organizing literary events, she works as a telephonic Tagalog interpreter. Please welcome my next featured guest, Marivi Soliven. Hi. Well, you are a prolific Filipino-American writer who won the Carlos Palanca Award, which is equivalent to the Filipino Pulitzer Prize. It's pretty huge for your novel, Mango Bride, published by Penguin Press. I am honored you wanted to be on your Artsy Girl podcast to be my featured artsy-fartsy guest. Before we talk about your book, I would like to get to know you a little more. Can you tell us where you were born and where you grew up?
Yeah, well, I was born in Manila. And because I came to the United States, in my 30s, I don't identify as Filipino-American. I'm Filipino. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in the Philippines. I went to the university. I did grad school later on in Boston. But I was always thinking about writing. It was, there were only three things I do well, and that was writing, cooking, and shopping. So that was the only thing that didn't involve any kind of consumption. So I just kind of played to my strengths.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So what did you major in?
Journalism, because it was the only course at the University of the Philippines that had only one math class.
Right. I hear you on that one.
Yeah. And, it had a wide range of electives. So I did as many electives as I could in English, literature, in languages. That I don't know if at the time the creative writing major was an option. I could be wrong, but because I started out in mass communication, I just didn't look into the Department of English and Comparative Literature. So the creative writing option was a possibility in that time.
Where did you go to school in the Philippines?
The University of the Philippines.
Oh, okay. University of the Philippines. And then you went to Boston and you majored what in there?
In Boston, I majored in teaching K through 8 because I figured I really needed to have a day job.
Right.
To support my writing. And so I thought, well, if I'm a teacher, I'll always have work. Yeah. So that's what I ended up doing.
Okay. I understand the premise of your novel. It's about two Filipinas navigating through the difficult immigrant experience. When did you decide to write your novel, and where did you get that idea from?
Well, so the teaching, day job worked for a while, but eventually I found myself doing Tagalog telephonic interpretation. So I work at home. I work on the phone for several telephonic interpretation companies, and I got a lot of calls from the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
Wow.
During the subprime mortgage crisis. So essentially what happened was a social worker explained to me that when the economy goes down, domestic violence goes up because, men are laid off, they're in a bad mood because their hours are cut or they're suddenly unemployed. And what happens is they take their frustrations out on the nearest target, which is usually so after, I had to take a lot of calls for that. And I figured, well, this was the story that needs to be added to the whole conversation on immigration, because, there's the one thing about like people trying to better themselves and follow the American dream. But then there's also the flip side of that, of people trying to better themselves by marrying better, or marrying up, as some would like to call it, into the American, into the United States via mail order bride system, or even just through internet dating.
Mm-hmm.
So that became one of the plot lines of the novel.
Right. So without giving the whole story away, now the mail order bride really piques my interest, because we all hear about that, the whole mail order bride. In your character, can you just briefly describe, without having to divulge the whole storyline about it? How did so this character? What's her name? And
Beverly.
Okay. And so, yeah, just give a little synopsis of that, if you will.
Well, Beverly basically is an orphan. Her mother dies in a tragic accident, and they were never rich to begin with, because the mother was a single mom at the time of her death. So even though her mother named her Beverly after Beverly Hills, because she was desiring for her daughter to have a life that was as rich and glamorous and beautiful as all of those people who live in Beverly Hills. Beverly goes on to grows up, and because she has to cut her schooling because of her mother's death, becomes a waitress. And one of her friends says, "Oh, look, I met this American on a mail order bride matching, internet matching or dating system. And why don't you try it out?" And so she does, and she ends up in an abusive relationship. So
I see. So yeah, that's very, very interesting. And it does kind of shed the light of the struggles. Philip.
That's my cat.
I thought it was your cat. I thought it was a cat.
If you want to do it again, I don't blame you. But when he finds his toy mouse, he has to tell the world.
Isn't that cute? Oh my goodness.
Wandering around. He went away for a little bit, and then he came back, and now he just like...
Aren't they vocal? Mine too, I tell you.
So if you want to do anything over again, I totally understand.
No, that's quite all right. No. I think the audience can understand how cats are sometimes.
Okay.
I have two cats. I have one cat and 3 dogs and 2 chickens. So my chickens aren't in the house, though. They're outside.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, so that's very interesting and very cool. I mean, you shedding the light of avenues that these experiences can take people, in the immigrant experience. When did you decide to be a writer? And is it because of this idea you had, or did you write and publish before this novel?
Yeah, I actually published quite widely before I came to the United States. I had started out in advertising. I got burnt out doing advertising copy. So I tried doing creative writing, and I ended up, I went back to the university to teach. And while I was teaching at the university, I came out with several children's books. And then when my husband and I married, we moved to Berkeley, where he was doing his grad school. And I realized that, having not grown up in the United States, I couldn't really understand children there enough to really write children's books. So, because I hadn't had a child in the United States, so I couldn't get it. So, and the other thing that happened was, suddenly I was not only a colored person, but I was also a minority writer. And around the time that I was trying to figure out what to do in terms of writing, two of my old colleagues in the Philippines decided to come up with this. It was an online magazine, like Salon, but for the Philippines. And I ended up writing several, like about 30 articles for them over the span of 3 years.
Wow.
And so that got me started thinking about the immigrant situation and, our concerns, our challenges, our fears. and the particular granular change that every immigrant or anyone who's been displaced undergoes when they leave their entire support system back in the home country, and then they have to kind of reinvent themselves
Right.
in a new country. So that became kind of my exploration. So the other half of Beverly's story is another woman, Amparo, who she's not poor. She comes from a very socially prominent family, but because she's done something that might cause scandal and bring shame on the family name, her mother decides to send her to the United States before her whatever she's done taints the family's reputation in Manila. So that's another nuance or
Right.
another.
That's what's intriguing about the story, and I'm sure that these two characters, they come together, and I'm sure that there's a lot of underlying tension and all that good stuff. So I can't wait to, read the book. Can you tell me who your earlier influences were?
Growing up in the Philippines, all you have are the old white people.
Right.
I went through a whole Hemingway phase.
Yep.
Phase. And then I realized there is a whole other world of women of color writers out there. So when I moved to the United States, even before I moved to the United States, obviously, by the time I hit college, there was Garcia Marquez, and I just loved his stories. But it was really only when I moved to the United States and it became clear to me that for whatever reason, I was being slotted into you are a minority woman writer of color, that I said, well, maybe I should find out other people in this niche and see how they're doing it and how they're writing about their own ethnicities and their cultural makeup and the context in which they find themselves. So I began to read Jhumpa Lahiri and Edwidge Danticat and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, all of these other wonderful female writers who, are not now. They've had their time and they continue to rise, but essentially they're finding their way. They're making their stories be heard, and I find that really exciting. And I just wanted to add that after the Mango Bride came out, basically I began to get all these letters from women who had suffered the same kind of domestic violence that one of my characters had, and because it was so clear that there was a need to address that needed to be addressed. I found a local nonprofit that helps immigrant victims of domestic violence.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Separate from their abusers.
Yes.
And said, okay, we're going to have to do. I'm going to do a fundraiser. I had never pulled off a fundraiser in my life, but I organized a fundraiser with Access Inc., who's legal director for the low-cost legal clinic. Ann Bautista is the person who helps these women, like under the U visa, which is part of the Violence Against Women Act. She's able to extricate these women who are domestic violence survivors from their marriage so that they can gain residency without having to depend on their husbands.
Right.
Answer them. So,
yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. But I quite understand. Actually, it also happens to quite a bit to Filipinos who marry American GIs.
Oh, yeah. I can tell you, San Diego is a military town, and I do any number of calls that I had to take because women on the base were either being rescued, they had to flee and go to shelters, or their husbands were being separated from them because violence had been noted.
Right.
So anyway, to finish that story about the fundraisers, we were able to raise enough money to save 9 women.
Oh, that's great. Great.
They're now legal residents. They're separated from they're divorced from their husbands.
Oh.
So
did you know that your book would be helping other women?
No, actually, I didn't. I didn't realize that there would be this kind of a response.
Right.
I don't know any of these people. They would just, I know one of them. Most of them were people who had just read the book, but there was one student I thought was really I was profoundly moved by, because I had, as I mentioned, taught at the university several years before I married and moved to the United States. And one of the women who wrote to me about a year ago said, I was a student in your English 1 class. And I too suffered the same fate of Beverly, but I am safe now for my husband as my child. And I wanted to let you know that I saw myself in this story.
Oh my goodness.
And
This is giving me chills. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Any way that we can, we've done like a Saving Beverly fundraiser in several cities now, and anywhere that if there's a city that would like to, host a fundraiser, I'm happy to go there and help them, because it's somehow it turned into this kind of advocacy.
Right. And how would they get a hold of you if somebody is listening to this?
Well,
podcast?
I have a website, marivisuoliven.com, and all of my contact information is there.
Okay, good to know. Oh, that's fantastic. That it's very moving that you created this character from your hearing about the mail order bride situation, and then it kind of like transpires into helping other women who actually are victims of domestic violence, and you fundraising. That's just the very notion of creating a story that helps other women. That's just amazing to me, and I commend you for that. So let's switch gears a little bit. What are your current projects and future goals?
Well, currently I just actually completed a conference in San Diego, which I organized. It took me a year to organize, and we just had it earlier, the first weekend of March. And it was a conference that was exclusively for writers of color. It was called Centering the Margins, Conversations with Writers of Color, because I realized over the years of my living here as a writer that, when you have conferences here, you generally, like, the majority of the speakers are white. Mm-hmm. And if you're lucky, you'll get one person that's a writer of color. And I thought, it's impossible, especially in the country which is rapidly becoming like not just dominant white, but I think the estimate is by somewhere in 40 years or so, we will be a majority minority.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
And I said, it is impossible to imagine that of all the people who are here that are people of color, there are not enough of us to come together in the room and speak about our craft. And I thought, why don't I just flip the tables and have a conference just for writers of color? So we did it on the smallest of budgets. I got 30 writers to come together from across the country, from Michigan and Illinois and Alabama, and of course from up and down the West Coast. And we had 3 days to talk about the craft, to talk about the difference between fresh off the boat immigrant writing and people who had, been second or third generation, like minorities in this country. We had playwrights and TV producers and journalists and publishers talking about like the challenges of how do you find your way to getting your story or your poem or your play produced or published. Mm-hmm. And it was transforming. So that was one thing. I think I'll do it again in about maybe for 2021.
Where did you hold it at?
It was at the San Diego Central Library and at UC San Diego. And the funny thing about it is I wrote to all these people and I said, I have no money to pay you for speakers' fees or travel or hotel accommodations, but I promise to feed you. And the other big promise I make is that you will be the steak on the plate, not the parsley that everybody ignores.
Nice. Yes.
Your concerns, your interests, your voices. And there won't be, and white people are welcome to come, but they have to sit down and listen. Yeah. And with a pitch like that, people just came. They were just so happy to be in a safe space where they could just air out all their grievances, all their aspirations, all of their triumphs, in a space where people who were listening understood how much it took to get them there.
Yes. It's interesting. That's why I did this podcast, and Eileen Tabioso is my first featured guest. And, she and I have known each other for many years, and I have a close knit network that I've known for many years also, Filipino American writers, Filipino writers. And, I just, I haven't, when you go out in the real world, yes, there is quite a bit of a big discrepancy as far as the representation. And, but when we come together, like you said, it is a very welcoming, safe space. And that's great that you are doing that. And then I'm seeing more like an anthology that Luisa Gloria took part of, that's of color.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes. So, but we still have so many stories to tell, don't we? We have so many experiences to share.
And I mean, it doesn't take away from all the other writing that's out there.
Absolutely.
It's not like there are only certain spaces at the table. The table can be as big as you make it. For so long, there's been the white table, and then we've been off to one side. And I don't think that's a viable situation anymore.
No, absolutely not. I like to ask my guests this question because it is one way to learn about each other's process. And that is, do you have any set routines basically for your writing or anything of creativity?
Well, generally I try to write early in the morning.
Oh, okay.
Because I have to write in between the phone calls on my day job, it doesn't always work. But the one thing I think that is almost foolproof for writer's block as a remedy is I have a daily yoga practice.
Oh.
And when I hit a wall and I can't work my way through a plot knot, yoga, and by the end of the class, I'll have figured something out. So that is the one thing I swear by.
Right. For me, because I'm not like a marathon rider, but a runner, but I do run, but I can relate to that because, when you're working out the position, like in yoga, and you're in tune and you're thinking about, your plot line, your characters, it's the same way with running. I can work out, okay, because I'm working on a novel also, but even for poetry, it's like, okay, what's going to be the trope and what are the, I've worked things out in my head and I could so totally relate to that. There's several writers, I can't think of the names, that also do the same thing. That's where they, it's my form of meditation also.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah.
I understand your book is undergoing a film adaptation. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, when the first year it came out, National Bookstore in the Philippines invited me back to Manila to give a talk. And one of the people who attended, the events was a producer named Girly Rodis. And, she works with Regal. I think you would recognize her most recent project because it toured widely in the United States. It was a film called Larawan, which is a film adaptation of the Nick Joaquin novel or novelette that was eventually turned into a play. So Larawan became this sensation. It was critically acclaimed. It went to all the major film festivals in Europe and the United States and North America. And it's a musical. So anyway, so Girly, at the time she had read The Mango Bride, and she just, asked, I thought it was a rhetorical question. She said, well, what would you think about, do you think we could turn this into a movie? She asked from the audience. I was like, yeah, sure, that would be awesome. I didn't think about it, but 6 years and many emails back and forth later, it's finally gone into production.
Wow.
So
Wow.
producing it. I think they're they are in the process of casting, and they hope to release it sometime next year.
Mm.
Yeah.
So they're filming it where, though?
Well, half the novel happens in Manila, and half of it happens in the Bay Area. So
Right.
they film several scenes in the Bay Area, in San Francisco and in Berkeley.
Will you be on the set?
Well, yeah, I would love to watch
Absolutely.
it. And I have friends who have read the book and have taught the book, and obviously they live in the Bay Area, so there'll be a whole contingent of us just kind of watching from the side.
Wow. That's exciting, because it's like now it's coming alive on the screen. The story that you've created, you wrote, you imagined in your head, and you wrote it, and you fleshed out the characters, and now it's going to be in another dimension now, right? It's going to be like visual and audio representation of your work.
Yeah, it's exciting, but as with the book, I also feel like it could be a vehicle to open up, really difficult conversations.
Yes. Yes. Even more so. Yeah.
Yeah. Because Filipinos, they really like films. I hate to say this, but I think they like films more than they like books. So if this gets them to read the book, or at least consider the issue at hand,
yes,
I think it will have done its work.
Absolutely. I believe that strong-heartedly. Wow. That's amazing. So do you have any other novel ideas that are down the pike, you think?
Yeah, I've been working for so many years on this one novel. It's a historical novel about taxi dance halls, and a murder that happened back in, I'm going to say, in the 1930s. And it's, I had to do a lot of research. I written out the first draft, and now I'm rewriting it. So that's what's taken up most of my time.
I'm sorry. What was it again? You said
it's about taxi dance halls in the 1920s.
Okay, I'm not familiar. Was that in the Philippines or?
No, it was in the United States. So in the United States, for up until 1968 for the whole country, but in California up until only 48. Illegal for white women to marry colored people.
Oh.
So a white woman married, say, a Filipino, that she would lose her statehood. She would become a citizen. So it was illegal. It was a crime.
Right.
So what ended up happening, because if you remember your Filipino-American history, the 1920s and 30s were the times when that was the Manong generation, when all of the Filipinos came to the United States and worked hard. So these were usually young bachelors, and when they were denied, the chance to marry American women, the only thing they could look to was the taxi dance halls. And so taxi dance halls were an avenue where you paid 10 cents to dance.
Oh, yes.
There's a famous documentary called Dollar a Day, Dime a Dance.
Okay.
Explores this. And so, so they were all over the country. They were not only for Filipinos, but they were primarily for Filipinos. And there were a couple of famous ones in Watsonville that was burned down. There were a couple of them in San Diego. And so I'm writing about that era.
Well, I definitely look forward to learning more about that. That is great. It's been great talking to you. I'm learning more about you and your work. I wish you the very best of luck. And thank you for coming on the show. Oh my gosh. I've learned so much. And I'm going to read Mango Bride, and I look forward to your next project and also the film adaptation. So I just wish you the very best of luck, and I hope you keep in touch and let me know what's going on with you.
Yeah, thank you. And again, if the podcast comes out and you'd like me to share it, then I would love to hear from you.
Yes, please do share wildly, because this is how we get, you talk about, writers of color, and this is my podcast is supporting writers of colors, LGBTQ, and the socioeconomic, writers who are struggling also. So yes, most definitely. The more that we share widely about all our experiences, I think the better, and it helps other people also. Particularly, when we share about our passions and how our processes work, and I hope to also reach out and help others like that too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for doing that. The writing, what they say, the rising tide, it lifts all boats.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guests. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Marivi.
Bye, Christina. Thank you for having me.